Okay, thank you very much. In opening opposition, we have Paul B, Lauren, and Matt. Who will speak first?
Matt.
Matt will speak first, and your preferred pronoun for this debate is?
They or him.
Okay, and Lauren, what is your? Thank you. In closing proposition, we have Belgrade B, Helena, and Stefan. Will be speaking first?
Stefan.
And your preferred pronoun is?
Don't care or he.
And Helena?
The correct answer, Helena.
Okay.
Or don't care. Whatever.
And UCC lobby will be closing opposition. We have Cormac and Gary. Who will be speaking first?
Cormac.
Okay, and your preferred pronoun is?
He.
And Gary?
Doesn't really matter.
Okay, thank you very much. I remind you all that speeches are 7 minutes. After the first minute, you will hear a this means points of information are allowed and recommended. After 6 minutes, you'll hear a this means points of information are no longer allowed and definitely not recommended. And after 7 minutes, you'll hear a, which means you're allowed to add 1 or 2 more sentences, but that's about it. Without further ado, I am delighted to call on the Prime Minister to open the debate.
All right, thank you, Mr. Speaker, on the floor. Now, we're here today to discuss a problem that has been in our society for a long time. Generations upon generations of people are stuck in welfare. A small percentage, but nonetheless significant percentages of our population is stuck on welfare because they simply cannot find the way in their lifestyle to get their children out of this. And we want to address this issue by making sure that the best way to get out of welfare and the best way to get out of dependence on the state and other people and actually make a living for yourself and feel empowered about yourself is education. And we want people to make sure that their children take care and take advantage of all the opportunities offered by our modern education system and in a way that actually leads them to feel empowered and be independent for the rest of their lives. So, I'm going to talk about, well, a very straightforward case. Why do we want to do this? How are we going to do this? And then why is this fair compared to the rest of society and compared to other people on welfare? Now, first I'm going to bring you a bit of a model. Now, we're doing this in a European context, so I'm not going to give numbers or anything, but let's just say that people with children that perform very well will get a significant amount of extra money for their welfare. It will depend per country, obviously, what kind of money that's going to be. It's going to be up to, but not including university, because by then people will actually be adults, so, you know, not children anymore, so they're on their own, basically, like everybody else. And they're going to be reliant maybe on scholarships, and since they're from poor backgrounds, they will actually have a higher chance of those, so I don't think that's a problem. And we want to stress that we can also foresee that this is not going to be just educational, but also, for instance, if children do very well in sports, or other things that we think are beneficial for their development as people, and that will lead to some kind of empowerment in the long term of their lives. So that not only people with, you know, smart kids or people who just have a really good ability to learn things will have this kind of advantage. Now, on to the why of things. So, why do we want this in the first place? Well, we think that education is, in general, the best way to get long-term improvements in your life and in your family if you're from a disadvantaged background. And we want people to get out of this disadvantaged background. We think that people feel tend to be at high risk of things like depression. We think they tend to be at high risk of things like disease because we see that people in a lot of lower socioeconomic backgrounds tend to have worse habits when it comes to health, and also all these kinds of things that we associate with welfare. We don't really want people to be in that in the long term. We don't think it's a bad thing when people are on welfare. We think it's necessary every now and then, but if we do think people should be empowered to get out of it. And so we want to break this trend of people being on welfare generation after generation. Now, education is the best way to do this, but the problem with education among people on welfare is that it's not very often stressed as a value. We see that people who have been in welfare for a while tend to have not been to school themselves. So unlike people from middle classes or upper classes, where education is seen as a given, you know, it's something you're always going to stress your child to do, in these lower classes, people will not actually have that same kind of value. I'll take you in a minute. So we need to incentivize it in another way. And we think that doing this with extra money is a great way to incentivize this. And I'll come to the mechanism, yes?
Then do children of middle class parents have an advantage compared to children of working
Sorry?
Do children from middle-class backgrounds have an advantage in school compared to children?
Oh yes, they certainly do, because they're going to be helped more by their parents, because their parents will actually will see that this is a necessary thing. They'll maybe get tutors, because these middle-class people can actually afford tutors and that sort of thing. They will have schooling after school. They will go to cram schools. All those sorts of things are the reasons why the socioeconomic position of your parents is the single biggest indicator of your educational and later on financial success in life. So yes, we do actually think they have an advantage, and we want the government to level this out a little bit, because that's, after all, the whole point of having a welfare state. So how does it incentivize in this way? Well, the thing is, one of the things we see in welfare families is that often short-term decision-making prevails. Why is this? Well, being on welfare, you just don't have a lot of money. So being on welfare means that constantly you're making ends meet. If you're constantly making ends meet, it means that you're not thinking about 20 years from now where your kids are going to be. You're thinking about tomorrow. How am I going to clothe my kids? How am I going to feed my kids? That's the problems that are on your mind. And by making sure that people actually have more money if their children do well in school, you link the short term to the long term by providing short term gains for things that are good in the long term. And we believe that this is a great way to help people achieve that kind of long-term thinking. And because they have an incentive to actually do this, they'll become aware. They'll start thinking about education as something that is positive, and also start thinking about education as well. And how can I help my child achieve this? And we think that at one point this will become innate. They will internalize this positive thinking about education, and this is a great way to achieve this long-term educational advantage. Yes.
If you're doing really, really bad in school, is it possible to just overnight think this is great, I'm now going to
no, we don't think it's overnight. It's something that we have to do in the long term. You can learn to learn, however. A school is something that you can learn to be good at. Of course, there's innate ability, but we also definitely see that the way that people structure that kind of learning is very, very important in the way they actually have results. So we actually think that if you start this from age 4 onwards, and you start this policy from age 4 onwards, people will actually help try to push the children to do well in school, and maybe give their children the tools and start helping their children at home, because they realize how important it is to learn their children to learn. So that's the mechanism basically why we think this is going to work. And why is it fair? Well, we do think that people at a welfare are at its advantage. We already talked about that. And government, the welfare state is there to level the playing field for people. So we think that people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds have as much of a right to have their children become successful as people from middle class backgrounds. And so we should spend, we do believe that that's why it's justified to spend a little bit of extra money on this. And why is it actually fair to other people on welfare who maybe have children who really are not very good at learning? Well, like we said, we think that maybe those children will be very good at sports. But moreover, even if this is the case, we still believe that we think we're going to help a significant amount of people get ahead in life. And that's why we also think this is a fair and valid policy to do. Now, what have I told you today? I've told you that education is a long-term thing, that we have to stimulate long-term decision-making. I've told you how this is going to work this way by linking up short-term benefits to the long-term. And I've told you why it's fair and why this is something that the government should be doing, because we think that people shouldn't be at a disadvantage for life. They should only be at a disadvantage for the shortest period of time possible. And that's why you vote proposition today. Thank you.
I thank the Honourable Chair for inviting me up. Okay, I'm going to outline for you today why it isn't actually having help support from your parents and isn't necessarily education that lifts people out of welfare, and why it's self-belief instead that's far more important. I'm also going to explain how creating extra stress on children and who are experiencing very stressful times already, examinations, and even sport are very stressful nature because they're competitive. And we explain how putting extra stress on those children when their parents view them now as a financial investment rather than as children, because we're going to explain why that might be. And we think that when their parents view them as financial things and put extra pressure on them, and perhaps might create the impression within those children that their parents are financially dependent on them, or at least that some of their continued living is dependent on them. We think that that's going to create extra stress, and I'm going on to explain why this is a really terrible thing and will result in worse performance academically and vocationally and in sport for children from families on welfare, and also why it might have other negative effects. No, thank you. Firstly, I'm going to talk about self-belief. It isn't necessarily the case that the reason people are stuck in welfare is that they haven't got the necessary grades to get out of it. We note that a vast number of jobs across the European Union don't necessarily demand you have excellent grades. They demand you might have reasonable grades. We acknowledge that there are some times that children from welfare families don't get that. However, in the vast majority of cases, most children will come out of school with some sort of academic grade. We think that given that there are considerable opportunities that are not dependent on academia, we note apprenticeships, we note vocational jobs, we note general jobs that you can get into if you haven't necessarily performed extremely well academically, that you can work your way up in. No, thank you, things like the armed services and the service industry. We think it's perfectly possible to get out of welfare through means that are self-belief rather than education. I'm going to explain how this massively damages their child's self-belief. Okay.
Right, but how do you think you get the self-belief? Do you think you get it maybe by actually doing your best at school and creating a work ethic, developing a work ethic, so you actually become a valid employee?
Okay, so I acknowledge that part of school's job is to build a work ethic. I'm going to explain to you, though, why having a situation in which parents no longer view their children necessarily as children, but as their financial outcomes, you have a reduction in that self-belief. So, when a parent or parents or family view a child's prospect not as what that child is like as an individual, but what potentially that child could mean for them financially, and we know that we acknowledge that people on welfare quite often need financial help and will be quite happy to take extra financial help. We think that the point at which they view their children as a way to get that financial help rather than as individuals themselves, no thank you, means that they then put emphasis on them and put extra pressure on them that might not otherwise have existed. We acknowledge that sometimes a little bit of extra pressure is good. We think, however, that in a situation in which these parents and these families are purely viewing these children as a way to attain more financial stability for them, a way to have a better life for them, we think that massively damages their self-belief. Furthermore, we think that a situation will be created in which, within that environment at school, children will be told, you're only doing well because your parents are pressuring you, and they're only doing that because they're getting money for it, money from the state, and there's not necessarily that they care about your development as a person, that they might instead care about your development as a financial money-making opportunity. We think this is terrible for someone's self-belief, and we think it creates a situation in which they believe that their value as an individual society is not what they can achieve on an individual basis regardless of academic grades, but is instead valued purely on how much financial output they can make, be it for their family or be it for something else. We think this is incredibly damaging to an individual and their ability to act fairly well in society, and we also think it's damaging their ability to get out of welfare because they now become perceived that they only have value as a financial object. When you only perceive your value as a financial object, you tend not to have the work ethic that we think is a great idea. You tend not to devote more to your job than is necessary to get that extra promotion, to make that leap out of welfare. You view it purely as a term of how much money you get and how much you can make out of it. We don't think that's good for your self-belief. We think it means that you no longer work those extra hours to get the promotion, and you don't have as much desire to perhaps go and get adult education programs when you've left school. Okay, no thank you. No thank you. So I'm going to talk to you about stress. And this is particularly... No, thank you. This is particularly with regards to sports and particularly with regards to academic performance. Note that because of the competitive nature of both these things, sports and academic performance, you are already under a great deal of stress when you're involved in those environments. the highest rate of suicide amongst teenagers in the United Kingdom, for example, tends to be when they're undergoing their A-levels or their GCSEs, and whatever. I suspect when you look at equivalent rates across the European Union, you will find similar things for equivalent education examinations across the European Union. Note that this is also, like, sport also has this. It's incredibly stressful. You do sometimes get people who self-harm, who become depressed, or commit suicide because of the stress they're already under from sport. Like, when you take these already very stressful situations, and now you're having more stress put on top of you, because your family are putting extra pressure on you to do well at this thing, because it means they can have a better lifestyle, and they're putting extra pressure on you, because it means they can do a little better. Okay.
But exactly the thing you're talking about already happens in status quo. Parents pressure them to go to work, not to have time to study.
Okay, we acknowledge that people are already pressured. We know that work is a less stressful environment, perhaps, than the examination system, more stressful environments for sport, because those are very competitive environments, whereas for the most part, the jobs that people get into the status quo aren't necessarily that competitive, aren't necessarily that stressful. We think that, considering that everyone, because of mandatory education policies, I'm assuming they're EU-wide, I don't actually know, but they definitely are in the UK, Netherlands, Germany, France, that you must do education up to a certain age, you must take a certain number of examinations. We think that inevitably these are already stressful times and the parents are going to put extra stress on them. So we've got a combination of two sets of stress in a very stressful time. You're probably going to get more people perhaps failing their grades to the extra stress, taking actions that are harmful to them, for suicide or self-harm, becoming depressed, and having worse grades because of the extra stress they're on. Note that that's also a reason people don't get good grades at the moment, because they're under lots of stress. The point at which you're putting more stress on someone isn't going to mean you get better grades, and a better academic performance or better sport performance. It probably means you get worse. Okay, so I've told you why it's damaging to people's self-harm, and self-harm, damaging to people's self-belief, and why it's damaging to their ability to do well academically, well in sport, and why it creates a massive amount of stress on them that is unnecessary and creates harm for them and others. These reasons are heartily opposed.
Thank you for the floor. So what I'm going to do in my speech is I'm going to bring a few points of rebuttal, then I'm going to a bit more into the mechanism, and after that maybe I'll explain something about class emancipation and how this policy is good for the broader society as well, and not just for the parents and the children that are affected by this kind of stuff. So first of all, we don't really buy into the link that First Opposition makes here, that the moment you get money for something, your self-worth gets destructed, right? It's not like because I receive student loans, I think that the only reason that I can achieve something in society is because of these student loans. These are something that help me in order to achieve something, but it doesn't depreciate my self-worth or something instantly. And then they talk about stress, stress that is a big problem in society, and they're right. But I don't think they exactly have the right kind of people in mind here, because the stress that is put on people is mostly people who are from rich backgrounds and actually have a tradition of academia within their family. Lots of parents who actually expect their kids to become just as successful as they are pressure their children into doing these kind of things, right? Children that grow up in families that are on welfare also have very stressful lives, but mostly because they're bored out of their minds, right? They don't have much to do, and their parents don't have much to do either. And this is something that also reflects on their children, right? Because their parents sit on their lazy ass all day. This is something that often happens, don't be so correct. And what happens as well is that these children look towards their parents and learn from them, and they learn the wrong kind of stuff in this situation. So the moment that we implement this policy, we think that mostly the more stress is put upon the social class who actually have problems because they have too little to do, and this also relates to self-harm in the form of alcohol and drug abuse, which is much higher among neighborhoods, and yeah, that's also self-harm. We don't think that is good, right? So, and then you say, but maybe we don't only need people in academia. And we totally agree with that, right? We believe that every child should get the kind of thing that he is best at. But if a child is actually a brilliant, could actually be a brilliant person in academia, or be something on the top of the ladder in the corporate sphere, we think that is something that is worth to invest in. And what you say is that the moment you are from a poorer background, you should actually choose to go to a vocational school and choose for another job, right? While there may be people from higher social classes, children, who are actually more suited for this kind of jobs, right? We see right now that people who are from poorer backgrounds have a huge incentive, not only because of the tradition, but also because they live by the day, right? If you can get a job tomorrow, if you go to a vocational school, instead of delaying this decision by actually pursuing a career in academia or pursuing a career on the corporate ladder, but that doesn't really pay out until you're 25 or so, and you have to invest in it before then, that is a kind of incentive that people who at this moment live in poverty are more likely to make, right? So we believe that is very important as well. And then they say, people will view children and take children only because they see them as a means in order to get financial gains, right? This is something that simply won't happen. A single person, or a couple even, that lives on welfare is actually, they're poor, they can do everything they want to, but we see that most people who are on welfare come into financial stress and into financial problems the moment that they actually take children, right? And I'm on student loans, and that's actually below the welfare standard in the Netherlands, but I don't have any problems at all. But I also don't have any problems, responsibilities towards my children, right? So the moment that I decide to take a child, right, cannot be done, will almost never be done from a financial perspective, but also always from a perspective that I think that it can mean something for society in order to invest in this child, and maybe on the long term make the world a better place, and make the future of my child better, and all that kind of stuff. So how does this actually work, right? Because we see that parents have a huge influence on how they raise their children, right? First of all, that just gives parents more self-worth because they have the idea they can do something for their child, right? Okay. You don't have to be, yeah. Okay, so you and your partner talked about, you told us explicitly that lower class parents are less likely to have an education. And you also tell us it's important for children to learn. How can working class parents help their children to learn if they don't have the education themselves to do so? Sure. So first of all, there is of course a problem that parents cannot help these children always, but first of all, lots of children who go to high school in the lower grades don't get that hard stuff, right? Even if you, as a parent, don't have a top-class education, you mostly can still help your child, who's pretty intelligent, with their lower grade stuff, right? This is something that carries on into higher grades as well, because maybe when he's in 5th or 6th grade, it becomes harder for the parents to help them, but in that case, the child actually has internalized the values that you instilled in them in primary school and in the lower grades. No, thank you. So we believe that is something that carries over. Next to that, just being a good parent is very important in this as well. If you believe that education is not something valuable, you might actually be fine with your child playing World of Warcraft all day, right? That's what I did through high school. My parents, perhaps they aren't the most bright people in the world, but they could still have helped me not play World of Warcraft all day and create discipline and help me in that kind of situation. So I believe you have some kind of, it's hard to help your children the moment that you aren't very intelligent yourself, but it's not that hard that you cannot do something yourself, right? And if you get the idea that you can help your child, you can actually think that, well, maybe I failed a little bit in life, but I can actually make my children better and make the world a better place, but actually give these parents more self-worth, which also directly relates to how their children will feel, right? I believe this policy in general is something very important that will break down structures in society, right? Because exactly problems that opposition raises here of people in poverty actually being in one class and people who are going to Oxbridge living in another class, that leads to people being afraid of stepping out of their class. The reason that people put so much stress upon their children in order to get a top grade education is because these parents probably don't know much people who actually have a job in a more vocational field and that kind of stuff, and they're actually afraid that their child might become like this, right? The moment that you help society in order to break down these barriers, people will become less afraid of stepping over these barriers, and that is good for all children, because all children will get the place that they deserve, and that is how society functions at its best. I thank you.
Does anyone have a highlight to all of mine?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
We thank you so much very much for your speech. To close the first half of the debate and perhaps possibly turn on the light, we are very happy to follow Lauren and Christina there.
Okay. Thank you very much for the floor. Okay, so today I'm going to tell you a few things about social stigmas that already exist within our society, and how this motion is going to make two specific, really important ones a lot worse, right? But first I'm going to start from some rebuttal that we've heard from Deputy Prime Minister, okay? And I'm actually going to work backwards from the speech. So towards the end, we heard some stuff about how this is going to give parents an incentive to work harder and to put more effort into helping their kids become more educated, right? Okay, so you yourself said that that these people are fairly sort of financially motivated and are kind of living day to day and really need this money, right? So I don't think that they're going to be helping their child, like they're not going to be putting time and effort into helping their child because they want their child to succeed, right? They're going to be doing it specifically for that money. And then what are they going to do with that money? Do you really think that they're actually going to be spending all of that money on that child and that child's education and for the right reasons? We don't think they will, right? We think that that money is so essential to them, and it's really unfortunate that they're in this situation, right? No, thank you. No, thank you. So we think that actually they're in such difficult financial situations that this money is so necessary to them that they're not actually going to be spending it on the right things. They're not going to be spending it on the education of their children, so therefore we don't think it's going to be helping them very much. Okay, no, thank you. So my next point of rebuttal was about, you said some things about thinking about sort of short-term gains, right? And you said that some people who could achieve academically could go on to do this, but instead choose vocational courses because they see a short-term kind of financial goal and a job, and they think that's a better life choice for them. Surely they'll be thinking even more short-term when they're thinking only of passing their grades so that they can get money from the government, right? That's not going to encourage them to go on further, to go to university and to further themselves. They're only going to be thinking about the money that they're going to get. As soon as that money stops, they're going to stop caring about their education. We think this is also bad. Yeah, why not?
Okay, look, even if parents don't internalise the fact that maybe they're doing this for education, we don't care if they're going to buy gold-plated water boilers with this, as long as they help their children. And that mechanism still stands. We don't care what they spend the money on, as long as they help their children.
Okay, right. So I understand your point, but that's going to lead on to like my main points, okay? Because that's leading to this kind of idea that kind of social stigmas about these people who they don't have a lot of money and they feel like the only thing, and money is like their only sort of motivation, right? I'm going to chat about that in a minute. There was one more thing that was said by a Deputy Prime Minister, which again leads on to my points. I literally have a quote. It says, "Parents sit on their lazy asses all day." Okay, now that is a massive social stigma that we have in our society, which is a huge problem. No, thank you, sorry. And this is what I want to talk to you about today. It's a huge, huge problem these days that people think that people on welfare are just lazy, they're just rubbish, they haven't bothered to get an education, no thank you, they're just kind of these sort of stupid people who sit around on their asses all day and just take money from the government, right? This is really negative for them. My partner told you about self-belief and self-worth and how these are massive motivators and are things you need to be successful in life, okay? And without them, like, even when they get jobs, even when they do things that are good for their own lives, they're thinking, oh, well, you know, I'm not really worth a lot, I'm not worth as much as someone with better grades, and that's really damaging for them. Yes?
But
don't you think that exactly when those kids get a motivation to study because they're going to get money, and when they become better in schools because they have money, don't you think that is exactly going to break the stigma that people on welfare are lazy?
Here, here.
I genuinely don't think it will, okay? We have this belief okay, not me personally, but there is a belief within society, right, that the poor are just kind of stupid, they're undermotivated, and they only care about money, okay? That is the other belief, that they only care about money. At the point where we're telling children, you can do well for money, that's reinforcing the belief that money is the most important thing, not your education and not your self-worth. And not things that are going to make you happy in your life. We think this is a massive problem, okay? We think that we need to be breaking this social stigma that people on welfare might actually just be unfortunate. They might have been unlucky. They might have become unemployed through no fault of their own. And actually, that's something we need to tackle. Not telling children that the only way to do well is to earn money, and living a happy life, perhaps, is something they should be valuing more, right? So this is the other social stigma problem that we have, okay? It was mentioned slightly about vocational skills and about working your way up through a business and the value of that. No, thank you. While I get into this point, okay. So the whole society is going to be seeing that the way forward must be to get grades, because if you get grades, you get money, and these people are financially motivated, right? So they're going to be seeing that the only way to achieve must be to get good grades, and then that will magically get you a good job, and you'll have lots of money, and that's somehow going to make you happy, right? So firstly, perhaps you will get those grades. Perhaps you will overcome the stress my partner talked about, and you'll get those grades, and you'll get that money. Will you go to university? Possibly not, because you're not going to be financially motivated to do that anymore, right? Maybe you'll get a job, but you're not doing it in something you're passionate about. You're not doing a job, no thank you, you're not doing a job that interests you, the job that you've dreamed of doing for your life. You're doing it simply for that money, right? That's not going to lead you into a happy and successful life. Yes, you may have some money, yes, you may get by, but we think people deserve more than that, right? Okay, and also, like, yeah, go on before I move on.
I love your ideals, but you're saying that all these problems already exist, and we actually offer a way to incentivize people to get out of these sort of things. So how is it going to be better under the status quo? Will you explain that?
Okay, we think even if the money itself helps these people, the social stigma that will be attached to them is actually worse than having this little bit of extra money, right? The point at which the stigma is worse, and people feel like grades are the only thing, that any other skills aren't worth having. You know, if you don't have an A in English and an A in maths, then you're just not worth anything, right? That's really detrimental to people's happiness and people's self-belief, like my partner told you about, okay? And these people, they may crack under the pressure, no thank you, they may feel the stress of these situations where their parents are putting such pressure on them and lose even more self-belief, and that makes them even less likely to get out of this problem that you think. Okay, we don't think that telling people that grades are the only way forward and grades are the things you should go for is going to make everyone happy. At the very least, if everyone gets A-level grades, they're going to be worth less, right? If every single person is getting really good grades at A-levels and GCSEs, then what are they going to be worth? They're going to be worth less, because everyone's going to have them. So, like, it's just not going to get you better jobs and better things, because it's going to be, like, devalued, okay? Some people just aren't into education. Some people aren't academic. And yes, you said things about sport, but that's just going to be undermined. The stigma already exists, that education and grades is the most important thing in society these days. And you're only going to pass it on to the parents, right? This is a relatively new idea. This is what I've been trying to tell you. This is a new idea, okay? This is something that young people kind of feel now, that their grades are the things that make them worth something. The grades are the things that make them important. And actually, we're now passing it on to the parents as well. And then people who can't gain grades are just going to be even more disadvantaged. We don't think this is going to help people at all. We think it's going to increase social stigmas that create negative situations for the people you're trying to help, and for these reasons we oppose.
Is it a problem if I stand here because of the camera?
No.
It's okay. Cool. No, I just want to stand here because of my papers. Madam Chair, we believe that the vast majority of individuals do want to get into university and do want to attain higher education, but unfortunately a lot of them and the majority of them on welfare are simply unable to do so. 3 points on extension. Firstly, why is this completely legitimate thing to do? Secondly, the relationship between parents and kids will expand significantly in opening gov. 3, social mobility, how this in the long run finally gets these people off welfare. So, before that, rebuttal. One, they tell us, well, self-belief is important for getting off welfare, not higher education. One, that's probably true to a certain extent, but here's an important thing. The most important thing for self-belief is believing that your results are rewarded. At the moment, when you can get a clear financial help for results, that's when your situation improves. We don't think that parents will just use this money for themselves as opening up characterizes. They can often provide similar incentives to their kids. So, if you get good grades, you can get new shoes, you can get a laptop. These are small things, but this is something which motivates kids at the moment when they see no point in gaining higher grades because they already are in a bad situation and there is no likelihood that that situation will improve in the foreseeable future. When your parents tell you, okay, if you get an A, we can buy you new sneakers, that is something which motivates kids to do far well. 2, we don't think that parents will now just see their kids as money machines. We think that they already care about them, but they often don't have time for that. We think that if parents only see their kids as money machines, we think that there are far bigger problems than them being on welfare at this moment, Madam Chair. So, they tell us they'll put a lot of pressure on kids to improve themselves. This is really do good in school, and this is really important. 1, some parents already do that in the status quo, regardless whether their kids are whether they're on welfare or not. 2, not necessarily all kids will crack under pressure, nor will this pressure be so high. 3, and most importantly, we don't think this is necessarily comparative because in the status quo, parents who are on welfare and the kinds of parents they're talking about often put pressure on their kids to get out of the education system as soon as possible so they can get off their backs and gain jobs. Now, on a comparative, kids are on pressure, being under pressure isn't ideal. But comparatively speaking, them gaining higher education and at one moment getting into university, which can provide a better life overall for them, is far better than them getting into limited, low-skill, low-level jobs, which will keep them probably on welfare in the future. Not ideal, but we win on that point. Lastly, closing asks, yeah, but how will these kids learn to learn when their parents often didn't have education? 1, not necessarily. A lot of parents just don't have time to devote themselves to their kids. But more importantly, and really simply, if they have more money from their kids doing good in schools, then very simply they can pay for tutors, they can pay for extra classes, all things which they cannot do in the status quo. So, why do we think this is legitimate? We think, Madam Chair, that elementary welfare, subsistence, is owed to everyone. It's owed to everyone to be able to sustain themselves, to be able to survive, and to be able to function on a very basic level. But apart from that, we think it is perfectly legitimate to award people who try more with more money. I.e., all of these kids are on welfare, but some tried harder, some achieved fair grades. In a society where you trying is rewarded, we think it is perfectly legitimate to award those who in the same situation tried more. So why do these kids then deserve additional benefits? Because when they have higher grades, then by and large, kids who come from middle class and higher class backgrounds usually have better grades in school for a variety of reasons. Then they come to a level where they have to compete against these kids. This is why they need this financial incentive. This is why they need this money. So they can have approximately the same starting position as kids who come from far higher backgrounds, so they can have a fair chance of who will actually go to university. About 97% of kids who go to Harvard come from a household which has an income of over $300,000. We don't think that being rich makes you smarter, but it provides you with far greater chances. This is why we need to make up for this. So, parents and kids. Opening already told you that parents have a problem with short-term and long-term benefits. Let's expand on this. 2, a lot of them don't necessarily realize the value of education because those parents who are on welfare very often did not have the same education themselves. By and large, people who are on welfare come from low-educated backgrounds. 3, and most importantly, they now can provide much more time to kids. So they can value certain things more. For example, they'll be more motivated to help them when they get home because they know that if they try, they can also get some of that money for their household as well. But two, if they're working really low-paid jobs, they could possibly get out of those jobs and help their kids improve more. Help them with studying things. True, they can't help with higher math and algebra, but I think that even a person who's on welfare, who has elementary schools, knows to sum up basic numbers or to explain very basic things to their kids. But even without that, they can be someone who is of help to their kids, not necessarily a pat on the back when they feel bad because of the situation they're in. This is huge help which these parents can now provide to kids. So how does this in the long run lead to social mobility? We tell you that these kids will now be far more likely to go to university. As I already pointed out, university education is something which generally a lot of people try to gain because it provides you with far greater chances in life. So how will it be more realistic now? One, as I already pointed out, parents will be more inclined to help. Two, kids will have short-term incentives to try, i.e. get a new laptop, get new sneakers, get nicer clothes for yourself. It sounds very superficial, but for kids at that age, that means a lot, and that motivates them to try. Three, they can often also be able to finance extra classes. They can also buy other things which will increase their chances in life. So why is that important? Because that means that in the long run, when they're better at school and more likely to go to university, that means that a lot of kids who are not good at school right now will be more motivated to do so. That means that a lot of these kids will be able to get into a good school, into a good university afterwards. Why is that important? Because one, broadly, a university-level job provides a far greater average salary in life than this. But much more importantly, you also gain better networks once you access a higher-level education. So you can also spend time with people from, let's say, middle-class or higher-class backgrounds. So you can have links with those people, which also help you through life. But three, and most importantly, these kids, when they do get into university, finally realize the value of education, because it's not just because of the money and networks, it's also the system of values you gain through a higher level education, which in the long run helps them, when they have kids one day, not make the same mistakes their parents did, and finally get them out of the vicious circle of poverty. Very proud to propose.
Ladies and gentlemen, closing opposition are very proud to oppose, and we're going to give you two main reasons why we do so. The first is that simply this model does not work. It does not achieve the aims that the government have proposed that it does. And the second is that given finite resources by government, this will actively deprive things that will work of funding and will then actively harm disadvantaged, underachieving children that we want to help. But first, some miscellaneous points of rebuttal. So we've heard from previous speakers that there's this stigma on being on welfare. There's this stigma that you get, and you just get money that you get basically from the government for free that you get and that other people don't get. And they say that this stigma will go away by giving people money for free from the government that other people don't get. Because remember that it's only children whose parents are already on welfare that are getting this money. So we say that if their goal is to get rid of this stigma, what they'll in fact do, no thank you, is it'll make it worse because the people in society who already see the stigma and see this prejudice will just increase it more, because they'll say, look, they're getting even more money that their children are getting that my children aren't, even though my children are doing the exact same work. Now, of course, it is easier for their children to do that work, but they don't see it that way. So we say that the stigma will actually increase. We've heard as well, that parents already pressure their children to go to work, to leave school to go to work. We say that if that's your problem, why not give welfare to all children in school, regardless of who they are? Because surely if your problem is parents pressuring children to work, like this could also apply to parents of all like children who do failing in school, which is particularly important because they're the people who the parents will be like pressuring to work even more because they're not doing well in school anyway. So we say that no thank you, that the solution, if that's your problem, that this like half-hearted solution will not solve it. Finally, we'd also just like to say, like ask, we heard that there's going to be like rewards for other things like sports and other ways that aren't academic. We say that this is quite hard to measure. We've heard like no clear way of like how this is going to be measured, that like this person is better at this than the other. Like if you're talking about like talking about things that it's quite hard to have a measurement. So on to our first point of extension: why this will not work. Because we agree with the broad aims of the government. It is a noble aim to fix the inequalities, unfairness in our education system and society. We agree that we need more social mobility. But unfortunately, the motion they propose does not achieve the aims they want, does not increase social mobility. It does more harm than good, and here's why. The key thing that we want to bring to the debate is that the key problem that limits disadvantaged children isn't a lack of motivation, it's not a lack of incentive. The problem is a lack of resources. We heard from opening government that the reason why middle class children do better than working class children is because they have more resources. We heard that they can get tutors, they can get grinds, remedial classes, private schools with better teachers. I'll take you at the end of the point, but I don't want to be for another small pile. So none of these are connected to a lack of motivation or a lack of incentive. They're connected to a lack of resources. Working class children do want to do well, but the problem is that they don't have the resources. Homes don't have the books, no thank you. Homes don't have the books for reading, they don't have the resources at home. And what is quite important, the previous speaker said that now parents will have the resources, but no, because the problem is that the resources come after they get the grade, not before. So you can't say that, so the parents won't be able to improve their children's grades with tutors because they won't have the money to get the tutors. I'll take closing.
The point is that in a status quo, they don't think they will ever get any resources, therefore they push their kids to work. Now I know if I give some time to my child to study, I'll get money eventually, therefore I'll push my child to study. Okay,
I'll get onto the time thing in a second, but the fact is that like the parents still don't have the resources to get like qualified expert tutors, to get extra classes, better teachers. They do not have those resources. And in fact, what it does, that leads me on to the next thing, that it actually widens the gap, because it means that people who may be on benefits but are still relatively better off compared to the people at the very bottom may have some resources to get some, no thank you, to get like some bonus or some measure of extra tutors. The people at the very bottom who need help the most will not. So by introducing this, within disadvantaged people, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. No thank you. The next problem is that we heard from opening that this will, allow parents to like make these financial calculations because it will link the long term to the short term. But we say that as we heard from themselves, it can't be done overnight. You can't just say, I'm actually going to now suddenly teach my children to be really good. We've heard from the Deputy Prime Minister that poorer people live by the day. We heard from the Member of Government that parents don't have the time to devote to their children. So we say that they won't be able to have this long-term investment. That it may be a great, I'll take you in a second. It may be a great long-term goal, but the problem is they won't have the time to give it. Opening.
No, it's not just about time and it's not just about resources, as you're in our case. We're saying it's about instilling values, and by linking the short term to the long term values, that's how we create that. And you don't offer any model on how to get there.
Okay, you said that I'll get to how we'll get there in a second. You said that the reason that middle class children do better than working class children is because they have more resources. Another problem is that we heard from a proposition that parents that one of the things that parents can still help their children with lower grade stuff. Like we say that no, like if you're teaching like learning a foreign language in school and your parents do not speak that language, they cannot help you. If they're dealing with like fractions and negative numbers and they don't have those basic arithmetic skills, which is probably one of the contributing reasons why they are in disadvantaged parents in the first place, they will not be able to help you. It's no use spending all the time if you don't have the skills. On to the second point. finite resources. The state has finite resources. If it spends money on one thing, it can't spend it on another. Doesn't have unlimited money. Even if you increase taxes, a limit to how much you can do it. So spending money on one thing means you're not spending it on another. By spending part of the education budget on this, you're not spending it on other things, such as funding schools. This is how we are going to solve this problem, by funding schools in working class areas, reducing class sizes so people get more individual teaching, extra literacy and numeracy skills. So by funding, parents helping their children are not as good as trained teachers helping their children, which is why we want more funding to this. You make it harder for advocates who propose these solutions to get funding, because we say we're already solving it by doing that. That's why we move to oppose.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, as government whip, I'm going to summarize this debate with two major questions. Number one, why we find this as a morally justified and legitimate idea, and number two, why we find this as a generally very good idea that will contribute to our society in a much better way. Before that, a couple of points of rebuttal. Number one goes on stigma mentioned by opening opposition. We in the status quo do believe that, majority of people believe that poor people are lazy, stupid, they don't work and all of that. Now, when we give them money, we can actually prove to the society that all of those people can be equally smart, equally capable, equally successful, equally good, and that the only thing that was stopping them to be that till this point was money and not any other quality they have lack of comparatively to other people that actually have money. The second goes to the stigma mentioned by closing opposition, where they say people will just think that we give them money for nothing. No, people think that in the status quo, when we give them basic welfare, that we are just giving them money for free. This situation in which we are talking about, we're not giving you money for free. We're giving you money because you were good enough to stand up from the bad situation where you were, to push yourself into working even more, and to finally achieve something. And we give you the reward as a society because you decided to get out of the vicious circle in which you were put from the moment you were born. No, thank you. Now, the third point goes also on the closing opposition. So number one, we now give them more resources, therefore resources will not be a problem for the parents anymore. Number two, we think that in status quo, parents usually don't push their kids to go and study exactly because they think that their kids will not get benefits from study, or because they don't have money to get them to study. Now they know, if I put my child in school and if my child turns out to be a good student, we are going to get money, therefore we will be in an opportunity to give our child benefits from education. And that is the moment where people that are in a bad position financial realize why education is so important and how you can actually get benefits from it. Number three, if the problem is the starting point for closing opposition, how will they in the beginning give the money? You can simply borrow money from someone else, because you know that if your child turns out to be good, you will get money back and you will return money. There are always alternatives once you know that you can actually get money if your child studies. Now let's talk also about the fact that people on top of the welfare will be out of it. 4 responses to that. Number one, we generally think that it's good when people get off of the welfare because that finally means they're in a better position. Number two, people on top of the welfare aren't really rich. Comparatively, they are still in a bad position, but just their position now turns out to be good. Number three, we think that our motion goes with social mobility. Therefore, more people down on the welfare will go up and up and up, and we generally think that more people will be off of welfare, which is something that we're trying to achieve as a society for a long time. And number four, the more people leave welfare, the more money we have for the extremely poor people that are extreme cases that like have issues with getting food or something like that. Therefore, we think this motion is very good for this. On to clashes. So number one, why we think this is morally justified. Not having money, Madam Speaker, obviously leads to huge inequality of chances. It's much harder for you to be who you want, to achieve what you want, to pursue your dreams, to like make your capabilities much better. And we do give basic welfare to everyone because we think that basic needs to be satisfied. But even with those basic needs, you're still in an equal position. You don't have money for good school. You don't have time to study. You don't have money for books. You don't get to meet those smart people called in very rich universities where you can get your networks. We think that it's much harder for them. We think that in that circle of people that are having struggles with achieving something, there are people that actually do decide to stand up and to start working. But those people have exactly the problem the closing opposition points: lack of resources. We think that we as a society need to award the people that decide to fight their hard situation and to achieve what they want. We think that by giving them resources that we have for those people that decided to fight against the issue they've been struggling with, we think that by giving them money, we give them all of these things that they have lack of, even with the basic welfare state. We think that we give them a chance to be better. We think that that is the moment where we say money is not something that should determine how capable you are and how good you can do in your life. If you're willing to work hard, we're going to reward you that, and we're going to give you the opportunity to go to that Cambridge, to get that degree, and to tomorrow be the CEO of the company, if your capabilities allow you to do that, because we don't think that money should be the criteria for something like this. Therefore, we get to the idea why we think that this idea is generally good. In the status quo, parents, very often push you to work because they don't have enough money and they need you to get some money. Number two, we think that they don't have enough time to teach you. Number three, we think that even though vast majority of parents do understand that education is important, they think that in their particular situation in which they're poor, education cannot gain them as much benefits as pushing your child to work can. So in status quo, we already see a huge pressure, but we already can notice one more thing. If poor parents push child to go to school, they usually push you to go to schools that will make you have low-level jobs and not go to university so you can get a job as soon as possible. Once we tell you we're going to give you money, we're giving you a huge motivation to help your kids to start studying. Number one, you will decide to give more time to your child to explain them why education is important. Number two, we're going to give you money that can give you opportunity to buy them good books, to buy them tutors, to buy them laptops and all of this stuff. But most importantly, we give you the choice, Madam Speaker. We give you the choice to decide, I don't want to go to low-level school. I want to go to the best school possible, and I want to work, and I want to be a doctor, even though I was born in a poor family, because now I give you resources that you need in order to be and to become who you actually want to be. And now parents will not limit you on that question anymore. We think that once kids actually enter school and realize that they can become better, that is going to be huge motivation to them. Number one, in short-term way, which my partner pointed out, we're buying you stuff. But number two, because you finally see that even though you don't have enough money, you're not stupid and you're not lazy and you're not someone who cannot achieve anything else. We think that they also start learning stuff, which is the moment where you realize the value of education, which is the moment where you will be capable tomorrow to tell your kids why education is important and why they should go to school. Once you start getting better and better in school and getting more and more money, you get chance of realizing why you should go to university and why you can go to university. Number two, you also realize that you have a chance of getting a scholarship. Once you enter the university, you get to meet all of those people. You get to study all of those very important stuff. And in that situation, you get the social mobility, Madam Speaker, because that is the moment where once you finish Cambridge, even though you come from a very poor school, you can become whatever you want, because you have the paper behind yourself and you have the education behind yourself. But do you know what that also causes, Madam Speaker? Other parents and other kids from poor families being motivated to pressure their kids and to push their kids and to help their kids be better. We think that is very good. We think that many people on welfare aren't motivated in status quo because they think that no matter what they do, they won't be successful. After seeing examples that will come up after this motion passes, we think that all of those demotivated families will finally realize that there is a way to help their kids. And because we think that we are a society that tries to help everyone and that tries to give an award to everyone who deserves it, and these kids do, we're very, very proud to propose the motion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Speaker, if I hear the word incentive one more time in this debate, I think I'm going to go mad. So, in closing the case for side opposition, we're going to be looking at three main things. We're going to be looking at social mobility and how on our side of the house it's more likely that more people will be able to move up from the poverty track and move up and gain and benefit and have a more improved quality of life. We're going to be talking about resources and how those resources are better used on our side of the house, and we're going to be talking about stigma and how the stigma is only worsened by the policy put forward by Proposition. Prop have come up here today, Mr. Madam Speaker, and they've talked about creating a great society. They've set out a new deal and the glories of education as a means of rising from the property trap. Truly, Lyndon Johnson would be very proud of them coming up here with all these snap words like that. But they've also been very naive overall. Because not only have they created a perverse incentive, but they've created an incentive scheme without providing the actual means for having that incentive make real and tangible outcomes that they say they want, which is primarily more working class people, more underclass people get more educated, and therefore they can get better jobs later on in life and put themselves up from the poverty trap. Because what proposition have failed to address is that it's all well and good to provide an incentive for pursuing further education, or indeed putting value on education to begin with. But when the schools that these people are more likely to be going to are located within working class areas, which tend to be poorly funded and poorly supported when compared to their middle class and upper class counterparts, when they tend to have poorer quality facilities, whether those be actual educational facilities or PE facilities or anything, and when they're more likely to have less access to the better teachers, then those lack of educational resources are the primary reason why working class people tend to be less educated overall than their middle class and upper class families. Like Stefan alludes to this issue somewhat in his speech, but he quickly shuffles away from it. Right? No, thank you. Because as Cormac specifically noted in the speech, a lack of motivation isn't the key barrier to pursuing education, but rather the lack of quality and, most importantly, affordable education available to the working class. Because John from the slums can be given all the incentive in the world to work hard in school and to work hard and pursue an education. But if his school is one that cannot nurture that desire to learn, because either the teacher is poorly paid and doesn't put much effort into his classes and just goes through the motions, like not every teacher can be Coach Carter and be going on this purely on a vocational basis. Thank you. When they're not, teachers themselves aren't motivated to put any effort into it because they're not getting paid enough. When the schools itself don't have the facilities to promote sports or promote science programs or any of these things, then it's impossible for Johnny from the slum to get up with it, to become more educated, because the environment in which he's in is one which does not allow for him to become more educated. But Alana and Stefan came up here and they started talking, we can generate these resources post policy. But no, they're putting the cart before the horse, and they create a paradox right now. Because what Stefan came up here and said to us is that parents can spend money on tutors, which are very expensive, or they can spend money on textbooks and more books that should have them learn within the home, which are also very expensive. But moreover, right, they create this kind of paradox, because in order to be clever enough to earn the benefits from site proposition policy, the parents have to put the resources into getting tutors or to getting these books and put the money that they would otherwise get from achieving into getting these tutors, and that's the only way that person can be clever enough to get beyond that barrier and get that additional welfare income, right? However, in order to get there, you've got to spend the money that you're going to get anyway. So there's no tangible benefit, for parents to actually put effort into their children in that regard. Because all it means is that, I'm spending money on my child so they can get more educated, so that I can get more money, but I'm spending that money on getting more educated. It just goes around in circles, and it doesn't really work. Like, Alana came up here, and she said to us, you can just borrow money. I asked, legitimately, on what basis? Because you don't know at the very start whether your child is going to perform well enough to get that money back, and therefore how are you going to pay back that loan. But also you don't take, I'll take you in a second, but also you don't take into account that debt is one of the most crippling problems the working class and the lower class face every single day. I'll take closing in a second, right? But they where's the collateral? What are they going to borrow that money off, and without them knowing that they actually are going to get that money later on, right? Because what it will do is essentially it will push people to money lenders who charge extortionate interest rates. Because no bank is going to give a working class person money on this basis, on the hypothetical that their child might be good enough to get a state grant. That's not how it's going to work. So it's only going to push them further into debt and keep them in the poverty trap. Go ahead.
On our side of the house, they at least have some reasons as to why to find money to provide to their kids. On your side of the house, they have none. Please provide some.
You can have all of the incentives you want, but if you don't have the actual resources there to begin with, it's useless because they go around in circles. In fact, Cormac provided you a very good reason why we would have incentives, right? Because we don't think, because guess what, lads? We win on the social mobility point. Because under your side of the house, right, only a select few benefit from it. The highest scorers, they are the only ones who get this additional income to be able to lift themselves above the poverty trap. Under our side of the house, and in particularly the policy that the ideas that Cormac brought you about putting this money into education, putting into more education, so specifically, I think the underfunded schools or underfunded education programs can become more affordable and more accessible to the working class. That benefits more people overall than your side of the house, which only benefits a select amount of people openly.
Yes. We've quite clearly explained in opening government that a lot of parents actually have the skills to improve their children, but don't have the values and have a general sense of not being worth much in society. Doesn't this have a detrimental effect on these children?
If they if they have the skills already to help their children, then presumably they would. Alright? Or because they would already have a value towards education because they've engaged in education and they found a value to that because they have those skills. So that doesn't really work out. But moreover, it doesn't take into account that it's not just a value to it that they say, oh yes, I think education is important. There's nothing that you brought forward that suggests the working class and people don't already. But time is a big factor for working class people. Working class people tend to work more hours than the higher classes. Therefore, they have less time to put back into their children in that regard. So it's not just that it's time you don't deal with that, because again, going back to the issue about borrowing, you can't know that your child is going to meet that standard together. On the stigma point, we also win out, because what we're told is that oh, they won't be, they'll see as more of a meritocracy basis. No, because welfare stigma is already a problem. You make it more of a problem by giving more welfare out for doing the same thing that middle class people and upper class people already do, which is value education and want to work hard at education. So it actually worsens the stigma issue because they're getting more money for doing the exact same things we do. So we win on social mobility, we win on the allocation of resources, and we win on the stigma. What else is left?